My name is Mallory Keene. I am 27, and by the time the champagne reached the top glass, my sister's engagement party already felt like a verdict. We were 40 floors above Chicago, with winter lights below us, surrounded by donors, planners, and old family friends. When my father raised his flute and smiled toward Bryn, to my only daughter who understands this family floated across the table without my name attached, and the people nearest us laughed softly before I set down my fork. Then his eyes slid to Wade at the place card near the service corridor, and across the linen came, "You still bring men who dress like they unload trucks?" Bryn touched the diamond at her throat and gave me that polished little smile that always meant, "Be graceful. Mallory, everyone important is here tonight." Wade stayed where they put him, jacket plain, hands rough from real work. And under the music I caught, "If you want to leave now, I'm already parked downstairs." I reached for my napkin and felt paper underneath the charger plate. Folded once, cream-colored, small enough to hide inside my palm without notice from anyone. The handwriting was blocky and careful. Just 7 words. "Ask your father why your mother's trust paid for tonight." And the room changed temperature instantly. I slipped the note into my clutch while Douglas kept talking about legacy. And Bryn turned another table of guests into an audience for herself. A server passed with more champagne. Someone asked Wade what line of work he was in. And Bryn smiled first with, "Nothing glamorous for this kind of room." He looked at the glass in his hand instead of her face, and I watched my father enjoy that answer as if humiliation were a family service. By the time the quartet moved into something bright and expensive, I knew I was not leaving that penthouse with a scene, only with the note. My condo was quiet enough to hear the paper when I unfolded it again on my kitchen counter. And those 7 words landed harder than anything Douglas had done upstairs. Wade set his keys beside the sink and watched me open my laptop, then gave me the only thing I could stand that night, which was, "Tell me what you need." I pulled up the refinance file on my condo, matched the date against the note in my clutch, and felt my stomach turn when the timeline lined up too cleanly. The old folder from my LLC opened first, then the licensing records, then the renewal emails, then the accommodation templates Keene's signature venues still used every week. I followed the chain one file at a time, hearing Bryn's voice from dinner still ringing in my head. Nothing glamorous for this kind of room. While my name sat on every original draft. Wade moved closer when I stopped at the usage logs, and when he saw my face tighten, he gave me, "They built their polish on your work. Mallory." I checked the routing guides for wheelchair access, the guest intake forms, the emergency mobility protocols, and the training handbook I had written before Bryn ever booked her first styled shoot. Every core document still traced back to my LLC. Not the company. Not Douglas. Not the family myth they sold to donors over champagne and imported orchids. I kept scrolling until I found the renewal clause they had counted on me never reading again. And this time I read every word twice. Wade leaned against the counter and asked, "Do you want to walk away from them? Or do you want to stop them from using what was never theirs?" I thought about the note. The service corridor. The way Douglas had enjoyed that table placement, and the answer came clean enough to live inside. "I want my name back." Then I opened the admin controls and started where it would hurt without crossing a line, revoking shared access to the accommodation routing library. I disabled the training folder next, suspended the template permissions after export, and preserved every log because I knew Douglas would call it sabotage before dawn. Wade read the screen over my shoulder and let out a slow breath when the final confirmation bar cleared. Then gave me, "That wasn't destruction. That was retrieval." I closed the laptop, slipped the note beside my refinance papers, and for the first time that night, the room felt like it belonged to me. My condo was quiet enough to hear the note unfold again on my kitchen counter, and those 7 words hit harder than Douglas could in public. Wade set his keys beside the sink, watched me open my laptop, and offered the only thing I could stand hearing. "Tell me what you need." I pulled up my condo refinance file, matched the date to the note, and felt my stomach drop when the timeline locked into place. The old LLC folder opened first, then the licensing records, then the renewal emails, then every accommodation template Keen signature venues still used. I followed the chain one file at a time, while Bryn's dinner smile stayed in my head and my name sat on every original draft. Wade stepped closer when I stopped at the usage logs, and after one look at my screen, he murmured, "They built on your work." I checked the routing guides, the mobility intake forms, the emergency access protocols, and the training handbook I wrote before Bryn booked anything. Every core document still traced back to my LLC. Not the company. Not Douglas. Not the polished family story they sold for years. I kept scrolling until I found the renewal clause they had counted on me ignoring. And this time I read every line twice. Wade leaned against the counter and asked whether I wanted to walk away from them, or stop them from using what was never theirs. I thought about the note, the service corridor, and the way Douglas enjoyed that table placement, and the answer came back clean. I want my name back. Then I opened the admin controls and started where it would hurt without crossing a line, revoking shared access to the routing library. I disabled the training folder next, suspended the template permissions after export, and preserved every log because Douglas would call retrieval sabotage by sunrise. Wade read the screen over my shoulder, let out a slow breath, and gave me exactly what the moment deserved. That was retrieval. I closed the laptop, slid the note beside my refinance papers, and for the first time that night, the room felt like mine. Dana spread the property packet across her desk and tapped one address twice, because the side parcel beside Douglas's flagship venue had a control agreement under Wade's foundation. I looked from the parcel map to Wade's face and felt the room tilt, because the man my family had parked near service doors owned their missing access. Dana kept her voice level and gave me the part that mattered most. Without that agreement, Douglas cannot complete the public access package he promised. I turned to Wade and asked the only question that fit the weight of that file. "How much of your life have you kept folded away from me?" He did not reach for my hand, did not soften it, did not try to rescue the moment with charm, only gave me the truth stripped clean. Enough to keep your family from pricing me before they met me landed between us, and it hurt because I understood it before I forgave it. The map stayed open under Dana's hand while I stared at the highlighted corridor and remembered Bryn's smile, Douglas's toast, and the table they thought fit him. Wade told me the foundation had bought that parcel 2 years earlier to protect pedestrian access, loading routes, and compliance around the restored property line. Then he added, "I never touched their deal, Mallory, but I was never going to sign anything that boxed out public access." Dana slid another page toward me, this one from my own LLC records, and pointed to the original licensing chain for the accommodation system. Every routing guide, every training protocol, every mobility intake form still tied back to me. Not Keen signature venues, not Douglas, not Bryn. They were never operating on ownership. She told me, "They were operating on your silence," and that sentence landed harder than any insult from the party. I asked Wade why he had let me sit across from my family without knowing exactly who he was. And this time, he did look at me. "Because I wanted one room in your life where my balance sheet didn't arrive before I did." Came back low, steady, and impossible to dismiss. I believed him, which did not erase the bruise. And that was the first honest thing about the afternoon. Dana closed the packet and brought us back to the only ground that mattered, which was paperwork, timing, and what could still be stopped cleanly. Wade made his position plain without drama, telling me he would not sign an access agreement that rescued Douglas from consequences built on bad records. I looked at the parcel map, my license documents, and the blank space where panic should have been, then understood I did not need saving. Douglas and Bryn came to my condo before sunset, dressed like people still expecting doors to open for them, and I left the chain on. My father looked past me into the apartment as if ownership could still be established by posture alone, then opened with, "This ends tonight." Bryn stood one step behind him with her jaw set too tight for sympathy and added, "You've made your point, Mallory. Now, stop embarrassing the family." I kept my hand on the door and let the silence sit long enough for them to hear the hallway hum, then gave them, "You didn't come here over dinner." Douglas's mouth tightened at that because we all knew the party was not the injury he meant to discuss. And the injury that mattered had paperwork attached. He tried a softer angle first, telling me families handled conflict privately, but the word family sounded thin after forged consent forms and my mother's trust. Bryn moved in before he could lose control of the tone and gave me the version she used online, polished enough to pass at a distance. "Vendors are calling. Clients are asking questions, and you're making us look unstable over documents you volunteered years ago," came out smooth. Practiced. And almost pretty. I thought of Dana's packet, the licensing chain, and the access parcel map with Wade's foundation across the top. Then answered, "I volunteered trust, not ownership." Douglas changed strategies fast because charm had failed him, and his voice came back with the weight he used on staff and subcontractors. He told me I had no idea what damage I was causing, that flagship contracts depended on continuity, that grown women did not torch their own future because of hurt feelings. I looked at his face, at the impatience already crowding out his performance, and gave him the one correction he had earned. This is not about feelings. It's about records. Bryn stepped closer to the chain and asked whether I really wanted my name attached to a public collapse, because once things became legal, there was no graceful way back. Her engagement ring caught the hall light when she lifted her hand, and all I could see was the same hand that had waved me toward the service corridor. "You used my work, spent money tied to my name, and sold both as yours," I told her. Grace already left this address. I took Dana's packet from the table beside the door and held it where both of them could see the tabs, each one neat and fatal. Repayment demand for $165,000, notice to preserve records. Cease and desist on the licensed materials. And a trust accounting requests landed between us with more force than any slammed door. Douglas stared at the labels first, then at me. And for the first time in my life, he looked like a man reading consequences instead of writing them. His next move was the oldest one he had, which was blood, legacy, inheritance, and the promise that I could still come back if I stopped this now. He called me emotional, short-sighted, ungrateful, then tried to dress the insult as concern by warning me no one would trust a daughter who did this to her own father. I let him finish because the chain was still there. The packet was still in my hand, and none of his words could reach past either one. Then I gave him the truth in the only language he had ever respected, which was obligation, consent, and debt. "I'm not standing here as the daughter you overlooked," I told him. "I'm standing here as the person whose name, money, and work you kept using after permission ended." Wade stayed silent behind me until Douglas glanced over my shoulder, and then one sentence came clean and final. "No access agreement is being signed to rescue bad records." Bryn's face changed first because she understood what that meant for the venue before Douglas let himself believe it. The hallway went still around us when I placed Dana's packet through the opening and gave them the last thing either of them wanted from me, which was precision. "You can answer the demands through counsel," I told them, "but you don't get to come back here asking for family after billing me like property." Dana moved first, exactly the way she had promised, filing for a full trust accounting, preservation of records, and removal proceedings tied to the forged beneficiary consent. Within days, Keen's signature venues had to stop using my accommodation materials, and the flagship deal stalled once their access package could not be completed cleanly. Douglas tried one last message through counsel about misunderstandings and timing, but Dana returned it with, "Then your records can explain the misunderstanding under oath." The fallout was not cinematic in the way rich people fear most, because nothing exploded and no one fainted beneath chandeliers. But invoices changed hands and doors stopped opening. An insurer requested renewed review. 2 vendors paused work. And the client behind the flagship property moved negotiations elsewhere while Douglas fought deadlines he could no longer charm. Bryn lost 3 brand partnerships in 1 week. And when her engagement photos vanished from her public page, I understood, image always leaves before truth does. The money came back in pieces. First through repayment pressure, then through traced trust distributions, then through the part Douglas could not explain once signatures were examined beside hospital shift records. Dana kept every update plain, giving me lines like, "This one clears the loan," and, later, "This one restores what your mother meant to leave protected." I did not celebrate when the totals reached paper, because after a certain kind of theft, relief arrives quieter than victory and feels more like oxygen. Wade stayed where he had stayed from the beginning. Not in front of me, not behind me, but close enough to be chosen instead of assumed. One evening, while we reviewed plans at my kitchen table, he looked at the drafts for the adaptive living house and offered, "No hidden parcels, no folded balance sheets, no surprises." I let that sit between us, then gave him the only future I could trust. Truth first. Always. Or there is no us to build on. We opened the place 6 months later in a brick building on the north side, with wide counters, quiet rooms, safe flooring, and kitchens designed for hands relearning certainty. My patients practiced coffee, toast, balance, reach, and ordinary independence there. And every small success felt more honest than anything ever toasted in my father's penthouse. I did not need the keen name to sound larger than life anymore, because by the time the front door locked each evening, my life already fit me. Thank you for staying with me through Mallory's story. If any part of it felt close to home, I hope it reminds you that peace, honest love, and a life that truly fits you are still possible. Wishing you healing, steadier ground, and brighter days ahead.